Welcome back to Smart Spiritual Solutions. In this channel, we use the scriptures to solve everyday problems and improve our overall lifestyle. In this video, I want to talk to you about why we shouldn't invest in complaining. Now, I talked about this briefly in my last video on learning to be grateful, but I think that this topic deserves a separate video because it's important and there are a lot of things that we can discuss biblically concerning it. So in this video, I'll be giving you 4 reasons why it is not profitable to invest in complaining. And when I say invest in complaining, I mean when we see complaining as a method for getting what we want or something that we can do in order to improve our lives. I'll be telling you why that might not really work. The first reason why we shouldn't invest in complaining is because we tend to forget the things that were done for us. Be it if we're children and we constantly complain to our parents, then we forget about the things our parents do for us, like put food on our table, buy clothes for us or so on, or even in our relationship with God. The protection and the good things that God does for us. We forget about them because it's all about what we think is important that we haven't gotten yet that we're constantly nagging about. If we look at the Israelites, and I'll be using this example often because they're a really good way of learning why we shouldn't invest in complaining. They forgot about all the things that God did for them. How he delivered them from Egyptian bondage and all the miracles and the signs and the wonders that he did for them to make that happen, which Moses later referenced in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 32 to 34, and how he protected them in the wilderness and led them like a shepherd would his flock. They forgot about all that. That wasn't important to them. What was important was the little things that God didn't do for them, like the food that they were eating, which wasn't up to their fancy or up to their taste, or some of the things that they had to suffer because they were in the wilderness. And when you're in the wilderness, there's heat and other related things. So they kept complaining and complaining and complaining. And because of that, they forgot about all the things God did for them. And that was why God became as frustrated as he did. Then the second reason why we shouldn't invest in complaining is because it sends the impression to whoever we're complaining about, be it to God or to whoever, that they're blind and they don't see whatever case that we are in. This is especially important when we're serving God, because when we constantly repeat our problems to him, that is, especially in prayer, we're repeating and repeating and repeating our requests, then it's as if God can't hear us. And so we need to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until one time it'll enter God's ears. It doesn't really show respect or trust in God. Rather, when we're facing anything, we should think that God already knows that we're facing something and he knows what we need to be able to deal with it. And that was what Christ told us in Matthew chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. But when you pray, use not vain repetitions like the heathen do, for they think they shall be heard for their much speaking. Be not ye therefore like unto them. For your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask him. If you read Matthew chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. Then the third reason why we shouldn't invest in complaining is because it doesn't usually have an end. And what I mean by that is, if we complain for something and then we get it, what ends up happening is there's always something else that we can nag about, or complain about, or, just not feel satisfied about. It always happens like that. The Israelites, for example, they would complain about food, then God would give them food. But then it's not about the food anymore. It's about what kind of food. If you read Numbers chapter 11, verses 4 to 6, they were complaining, oh, the food that you've given us, we loathe this light bread. We want the delicacies that we used to enjoy in Egypt. They kept on asking for more and more things. And the psalmist referenced this in Psalm 78, verse 20. Behold, he smote the rock that the waters gushed out, and the streams overflowed. Then the Israelites would say, can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? And in the same chapter, in verse 40, the psalmist also said that they kept on provoking and grieving God. How oft did they provoke him in the wilderness and grieve him in the desert? The final reason why we shouldn't invest in complaining is because, at the end of the day, we don't really get what we want, be it in our marriage, or if we're in our family, that is, we're children and we have parents and so on, or in our relationship with God. We don't really get what we want. We're not really satisfied when we keep on complaining. The Israelites only frustrated God with their complaining. They didn't live happier lives or even get what they'd asked for. Like when they asked for quails, God gave it to them, but then he poisoned some of them in his anger. And so they didn't really get what they wanted. And other instances like that. At the end of the day, the Israelites didn't even enter the land. Besides Joshua and Caleb, all those above 20 that left the land of Egypt, God in his anger just said, I'm tired of you complaining. You guys are not going to enter the land. If we read Numbers chapter 14, verses 22 to 24. So they did that to themselves by constantly complaining without an end. So at the end of it all, it isn't very profitable. So when we read those kinds of stories in the scriptures, we should learn from them because they're not there for entertainment or for leisure. They're there for us to learn, as Paul said. Now, all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. If we read 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. In case we're at a loss as to how we can solve this problem and overcome this idea of always complaining, I'll briefly give you two solutions. There are many more, of course, but I'll just give you two. The first one is learn to be grateful. That's what I talked about in my last video. Because gratitude always makes us focus on what we have and not on what we don't have, whereas complaining, does the opposite effect. If you look at the life of Christ, you can see that he never really cared much about what he didn't have or what God Almighty didn't give him or allow him to do. It was always what God Almighty put in his hands that became his biggest concern. If you look at Matthew chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, you can see him thanking God for the people who he gave to him to listen to his gospel rather than complaining about those who God didn't bring to his fold. And the second solution is to see God as a friend who we should support, who we should help, and not as a liability, that is, someone who is actually preventing us from getting what we want. So, for example, what Christ said about giving a cup of cold water, that is, giving support to God's work, if we read Matthew chapter 10, verse 42, we should invest more in doing that than in complaining and in nagging about what our conditions may be and how God is not solving them to our taste. So I think that when we do these kinds of things, then we'll see ourselves gradually overcome or rise above the idea of complaining about our situation, so that in whatever case we'll be in, we will always be satisfied, content, and happy. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you will be notified when we come back with another Smart Spiritual Solutions video. Have a good day, and God bless you.